Hi, everyone. Welcome to Journey number 30. Today, I have Kathryn Burmeister on the podcast. And I'm excited for this conversation, Kathryn. And to start off here, I'd love to just have you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, a little bit of your history, maybe what you were like growing up, what you were like as a kid, and kind of what you're up to today.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I am a personal injury attorney, but most recently I've become an author, speaker, and coach slash consultant. So I decided in middle school that I really wanted to be a lawyer. Nobody in my family was a lawyer. I just really became focused on the idea of justice and wanting to help other people. So in middle school was when we read To Kill a Mockingbird and Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And even though MLK was not a lawyer, he really spoke about the idea of just and unjust laws and standing up for unjust laws or against unjust laws. And so that really resonated with me, the idea of doing that and then being able to do it in a legal capacity within the confines of, our society. So from then on, I really just put my sights on that and figure out what I needed to do to get to that point. So my first legal job was in high school. And from there, I really got exposed to a lot of different practice areas, different size law firms, and ended up finding in my last year of law school that I was really drawn to personal injury. So it's the epitome of David and Goliath, right? I'm going up against the insurance companies
Yeah.
who don't give a damn at the end of the day about my clients. I don't care how many years you've been paying your premiums to them. They don't care. So it's helpful to be a person that's guiding someone through this whole process, because what should be so easy and should never require me is overly complicated, unfortunately. So having someone in their corner it's good, and it's really rewarding for me at the end of the day. That being said, most recently, it's just gotten to me, the idea of having to fight constantly to get my clients compensation. And so since I've written the book, I've really started to look at other ways that I can transform my life and my business and a new business into helping other people in a more immediately gratifying and fulfilling way for myself personally. So that's what I've been doing most recently. But as a child growing up, I'm an only child, born and raised in Atlanta. I'm still in Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta, which is ginormous and ever, sprawling. But yeah, only child. I grew up around adults, and I always had their respect and involvement in my life.
Hmm.
So I think that really impacted me as an individual, aside from who I may have naturally been. And I talk about that a little bit in my book, the idea of nature versus nurture. And I think it's both
Yeah.
for people. But I think being an only child, being an overachiever as a child, and then my normal becoming above average really set me on this trajectory of living up to my own expectations and then also external expectations. And ultimately, it brought me to a point later in life that I came crashing down. It was nothing my parents did or didn't do. They were just raising a positive child and trying to encourage me. And they never put like unrealistic expectations on me. It's just, I think once you start on that path and you start getting external affirmations, you want to keep getting that, right? I mean, everybody likes to be told they're doing a good job. But when it gets to the point where that's what motivates you, I think that can be counterproductive after a certain point.
For sure. Yeah. And, that actually resonates a ton with me. And, it was a very tough mental shift for myself of accepting that just because in certain aspects of my life growing up, my parents didn't give me what I needed or, in the way that I needed it. However, they were still doing the best that they could, that there was no malice behind it. They weren't doing it on purpose, and they truly did have my best interests at heart. But it wasn't necessarily what I needed. And so trying to make peace with that so that I can honor both sides of it. It wasn't what I needed. This actually affected me negatively, and it wasn't on purpose. And I can't blame them for it because they did the
Right.
best that they could with what they had. And I'm kind of curious too. Have you talked about like that David versus Goliath attitude and the personal injury law? Was that something that you've always had throughout your life and other things too, of like liking being the underdog or, like taking care of the little person or whatever it might be? Or is that something that you found through law that you really latched onto?
No, I think it's always been there. I think First of all, from a young age, I started doing animal rescue. I mean, remember in sixth grade, I literally was climbing an 8-foot fence out by the generators and, during recess to save a kitten. And my assistant principal came out, was like, what do you think you're doing? I was like, clearly I'm saving the kitten. Like, why would that, not be what everybody else should be doing? And so I had the strong sense of right versus wrong, and not because it's what I believe that I'm right. I think what I've decided is right is what, treating other people and other creatures well. And it's just a golden rule, right? I think that can get you so far in life. Like, how would I want to be treated? Well, and that's pretty clear cut guide. And I think that's really where I've gone in life. But yeah, so from a young age, I was picked on. Kids are horrible. They do what they do. So I think I kind of got that resilience early on. Standing up for myself, and then seeing other people pick on others, that really bothered me. So I'd kind of go out of my way to be friends with those people. And then I think from there, it just kind of became part of my identity for sure as I got older.
No, that's amazing. And something else that you kind of started off with that I was curious about is starting down the path of being a lawyer, practicing law. And then you said it, kind of got to that point where you found it tough fighting every day. Was that the catalyst for your change to expand into, becoming an author, becoming a speaker, broadening those horizons and the definition of, what a lawyer is? Was that the catalyst? Was it something else before that? Were there specific moments you can point to, or was it more of a gradual process?
I think it's been a relatively quick process over, I'd say, the past year. And I didn't write the book because of that. I wrote the book ultimately because I just think it was a powerful story that so many people could relate to. And it was very cathartic for me in the long run. And I'm sure we'll get into what it's about. But it gave me a lot of clarity on how I'd gotten to where I was from when I had hit my rock bottom to writing the book and owning my own practice. And then from there, I think I really realized I could craft my entire life and business or businesses around what I wanted to do and not what it had to be, societally speaking or in the profession. And so I've gotten to the point more recently within the past, I'd say 5 or 6 months, that I don't mind fighting, right? Like, I have the energy to fight for my clients. It's when it's just things that there's no purpose in, and it's just absurd things. Like, I have co-counsel on a case, so they're on the same side as me, and we're all representing different children for the same issue. And I have been fighting with them literally for 5 years just to be heard in the group. They're all older white men. I'm not saying it's entirely the problem, but I'm definitely thinking it's part of the problem.
Yeah.
I've had to send emails over my last partner's signature to get responses. They just do not respond to me these days when I stand up and say something that they are not listening to me on. I joke that there has to be like a burn book email string behind my back going on, from like Mean Girls, because it's just absolutely ignoring me. But even against the insurance companies, or, I had a prosecutor in a case. I occasionally do dog bite defense, like dangerous dog label defense cases. So I'm advocating for the dog in that case in a civil situation. And the prosecutor came at me just, like guns blazing. I'm like, we all have a job to do. Calm down. Like, where is this coming from? And I'm not a difficult person to work with. So it's just that over and over and over and over again. And then, making unnecessary work that ultimately affects my client in the long run. And I don't have any control over that. But then I'm also the one that my clients come to frustrated. And I get that. Like, I'm the person that they see, so they don't understand the process. And I explain it to them, but it just starts to get wearing after a while when you feel like you're the one that has to carry the burden of everybody and be the fixer of everything when there's so many things outside your control. So I love practicing law, and I don't think I'll ever give it up, but I've definitely decided that it's okay to scale back, be very particular about the type of cases I want for my own, interests, and then push forward on my other business in terms of coaching and consulting people. So I get that more immediate gratification of seeing progress being made within the bounds of what I can control.
For sure. And, I think that's something that's really important that you touched on there. And I'm just curious, because I think a lot of people in this world run up against it. I almost think of it as like the status quo. of being, told to be quiet or not listened to, or, not respected because of either what you look like or what your experience level is or whatever it might be. And, um, you know, the comment about the old white males is a very valid one of, this is the way it's done. We know better. There's this young girl that, is just annoying us or whatever they have in there. And I'm just curious because I know it's a very big topic, but from you specifically, fighting against that or moving away from that, was that, you know, did you do that in deciding to play in your own realms and expanding outside of law? In those situations, have you found, any specific strategies that have worked for you? I know you say, having to send emails from, one of your partner's email address to actually get responses. I'm just curious, digging into that a little bit more, if you have anything, and again, just acknowledging how tough of a topic it is, and it's, societal. It's not going to be fixed overnight. And so I'm just curious if you have any sort of insights for anybody listening that is running into that in their own life.
Yeah, first of all, I think you're right, it is societal. I think it's more prevalent in very antiquated professions like the law, like medicine, um, and clergy, I would probably say too. But it's getting better. There are people out there that do make a space for individuals that are minorities to have a voice, but it's still pretty bad. I'll be honest. I mean, as much as people think that they're woke, they're not,
Yeah.
or they just don't see themselves as being part of the problem. And quite frankly, that doesn't bother me. I don't mind rocking the boat and making waves. I mean, I'm sure, and I even put it in an email most recently to them. Like, I hate that I have to get to the point where I make waves before you guys even respond to me.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that way, right? Um, but at the same time, I wouldn't care if it didn't mean it was impacting my client or preventing me from doing my job,
Yeah.
right? But when it does that, that's what infuriates me. I mean, in and of itself, it's annoying, but when it stops me from doing my job and helping my client, that just absolutely pisses me the fuck off. Like,
Yeah.
infuriates me, absolutely infuriates me. So, I don't think that's the reason I decided to start pushing forward in different areas at
Mhm.
all, but it's definitely a benefit of being able to do that. And
Yeah.
I maybe naively thought that having my own practice would somehow change people's perception of me, and somehow add legitimacy. It didn't, quite frankly. It hasn't changed how they've interacted with me. And I've played the politics game, like, trust me, for 5 years. I've been trying to play the politics game with them and, not making sudden moves and, grease the wheels. And it just hasn't made a difference. And so I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is don't go in guns blazing, but don't feel like you have to, do the politics thing for so long or grease the wheels for so long and not make progress. Like, you can go in and say, here's where I am, here's my position. And if you don't get a response or aren't respected or disrespected, stand up and just be blunt about it. I mean, at the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's worse to sit back and take it from them because, they think that what they think is right. Um, than it is to stand up and rock the boat and, like I said, make some waves. Because at least then, in my most recent email, I finally decided, like, I'm not going to sit here and take this. One, I hadn't been really, but two, I'm not going to go down without a fight or not being heard on why I'm making this. I'm not doing it to be difficult, very clearly. I'm doing it for my client. And that's what I pointed out. At the end of the day, I can't just take your word for something because you've done this longer.
Yeah.
I need to make sure for my own edification and for my own, ethics and morals that what's being done is the best thing for my client. So, and even though I explained that, the funny part of this is I never got a response to that email from 7 other people. Never got a response. And I laugh about it because it's just like, it's just so insane to me that this is still where we're at in so many places. But you have to take confidence in who you are. And once you know and take the time to figure out what your morals are, what your values, I like to call them like little human startups, right? I mean, if you have your mission, vision, and values like you do for a company, but you have it about yourself, you're pretty much set. You can make any decision in your life and feel confident about it. even challenging ones, once you know what your trajectory is and what defines you as an individual. So for me, it's easier to let things go or just not even get upset about things when I know that I'm doing it in line with who I am.
For sure. And thank you for sharing that. I think it'll be helpful for a lot of different people of how to approach it. And while you were talking for that, for me, it speaks to the idea of regret, right?
Mhm.
Of, I would rather come out truthfully in alignment with who I am. I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to make sure I do everything in my power, even if I get nowhere with it, so that I don't regret not doing it. So I think that I wanted to thank you for that and sharing that. Um, and then I'd like to transition a little bit into your story a little bit about why you wrote the book and your own personal journey down that. I know that on our original call we talked about mental health, and you've alluded to kind of hitting your rock bottom. And so I'd love to just have you walk us through the story there.
Sure. So I've dealt with anxiety and depression probably since high school in varying degrees, and there's a history of it in my family as well. So I really had my first panic attack my freshman year in college, and that's when I really came to terms with what I needed to do in terms of being proactive about managing my mental health. And so I felt like I did a really good job. I've learned a lot about myself. I'm very much a problem solver. So to me, it's not a problem. I mean, that's maybe not a good word, but a challenge to embrace and learn about, right? If I run into challenges, I want to learn as much as I can about it objectively. So I feel like I am empowered with information. So that's what I did. And I did for a number of years. But like a lot of things in life, you don't know what you don't know, and you're operating based on how you've been operating for so long until there's really a big reason or push to change it, it doesn't happen. And I'm a recovering box checker, I like to say. So once I had checked off all my boxes and gotten to this dream job I had of working at a personal injury firm on the plaintiff side, I had colleagues that were similar to my age. My partner had been doing this for 30 years and really taught us well. He would let us do it. He didn't keep us under his thumb. I kind of had like this existential crisis. Like, what do I do now with myself? Who am I? Why am I doing this? What's my purpose? Um, and thankfully, I had gone back into therapy about that time and was working on those thoughts and ideas. And about a year later, I would say, um, I got a call from my senior associate that I worked under, and he said that our partner had committed suicide. And it was just out of nowhere. And even somebody that has been around anxiety and depression, like I'm very aware of the fact if somebody wants to do this, they're going to do it. They're going to keep it hidden. But it just was so bizarre to us. And come to find out, he had written letters to the state bar, to his family, his daughters. His daughters had just had babies, to us. He had been stealing from clients for 8 years, and he stole to the tune of about $1 million. Um, it was really, really hard, aside from the obvious, to reconcile your idea of somebody who taught you well, but then was stealing from clients. And not only just stealing from clients, but clients who had been injured emotionally, physically, had lost their homes because sometimes they couldn't pay medical bills, associated with their injury cases. That's really tough. And to feel like you were a part of that in some way, if at all, anyway. And of course, none of us knew. None of us were on the finances, but that still doesn't change the fact that we had to deal with the fact that we were on the periphery of it. Um, and then dealing with the fallout from that. So he had lied to the senior associate about the overhead and all these things to bring him on as a partner and get him involved. And so it was about a month that they were co-partners before the founding partner committed suicide. And after that, we took a hard look and said, okay, this is not going to survive, right? But we have all these cases. What do we do? And so I agreed to go off with a now partner and one paralegal and try to salvage what we had, because not wanting to give up, I decided to jump into this, all in, all in. And so we started a firm. I was basically running all the cases. So it was about 70 some odd cases, well over half of them in litigation, which means there's just, in personal injury in particular, to give some reference, there are tons of deadlines and tons of paperwork as compared to a lot of other practice areas. So if you miss a deadline, you can malpractice. There's just a lot on the line. So I was running all of that. My paralegal was undoubtedly like the best thing that had happened to me and helped me, But in terms of attorney and responsibilities, that's what I was doing. My partner was very much checked out mentally and physically. And not making light of what we all went through is hugely impactful. But the reality was we all went through that. And some of us rose to the occasion, others didn't. And for a long time, I felt like I should be doing more, right? Those shoulds. I should be doing more. I wasn't doing enough. And I was operating on adrenaline for about a year and keeping my paralegal's emotions in check, my emotions in check, dealing with the fact that my partner wasn't there. And finally, I hit my rock bottom. And I don't say that flippantly when I talk about addiction to the status quo, which is, overcoming addiction to the status quo is the title of my book. I don't say addiction flippantly. I genuinely believe it is an addiction, and quite honestly leads to other addictions like alcohol, money spending, drugs, anything like that. But I did hit my rock bottom of my addiction to the status quo. And I called my husband home from work to meet me there. I was so concerned about where I was mentally, because I was just exhausted, absolutely exhausted, and just wanted to sleep forever, right? It's not that I didn't really want to be here. I just didn't want to have to deal with what I was dealing with. And
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people don't understand about suicide or suicidal ideations. For me, it wasn't that I want to hurt anybody or I was being selfish or that I really didn't want to be here. I just didn't want to have to deal with what I was dealing with for so long. And almost overnight, a switch had been flipped. And I was very clear the next day about what I needed to do and what I was going to do. And that's the thing. I had known what I needed to do, right? We always know, but we don't actually do it. And for some reason, just something was very clear. And I knew I had to start drawing lines in the sand. I didn't feel bad about it. I wasn't going to keep pushing myself to, the nth degree of my own mental health and physical health. And I was able to really align with what I had known for so long and let everything go. But what I genuinely believe from that situation is nobody should have to go through that to get to that point in their life, right? And so the next question is, okay, so how do we get to that point without going through a trauma? And that's what I'm trying to do with my coaching and consulting, is really help people get there and make changes in their lives to where they can embrace adversity in a healthy way, instead of something that becomes traumatic for them, or prevent major traumas from happening altogether. But after that point, I knew, one, I couldn't keep dragging somebody along in a practice whose name was on the door that they didn't care about. Two, that I could do it on my own because I had been doing it on my own. And that was one of my biggest fears, right? Like, I never wanted to be on my own because I didn't know what I was doing. I'd literally done it for an entire year at this point. So I'd proven to myself that I could. And that's what this really came down to. I found out during writing the book what the whole shift was. I had finally proven to myself, and even if it just coalesced in that one moment overnight, I'd proven to myself that I was enough. And for so long, I had believed that I wasn't, that I had to check off all those boxes, or even once I had, that I still wasn't doing fill in the blank, or I wasn't becoming fill in the blank. And so the idea of being enough and keeping up with all the shoulds, finally broke me, but it made me realize too that I really was enough at the end of the day. If I could get over this and get through this when so many people would have walked away, at the first sign of trouble, then that's really powerful. And again, people shouldn't have to go through that. So that's what led me to start my own firm, break off my own cases, and really set the rules for what I wanted for my life and my practice. And I ended up writing a book with that as the backdrop, the story as a backdrop, but also talking to people, high-level professionals, about what it means to live a life like this, that is unfulfilling, it's not sustainable, and the fact that it takes a lot of work to get to a healthy place, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, you're never going to be on your deathbed wishing that you had worked more. I don't care how much you love your job. You're going to wish you spent time in relationships with people, yourself, that's fulfilling. And I don't know what's after this life. I don't think anybody truly does. But whatever you believe, I genuinely believe that we know right now is that our purpose is to be here in this existence. And I believe it's to be happy. Whatever that happiness is for everybody is different. And it doesn't mean it's rainbows and kittens all the time, right? But it does mean that you can encounter life in a healthy way that is fulfilling at the same time.
That's huge. And that's such a powerful story. And I just wanted to, again, thank you for sharing that with us. And there's so many different parts to hit on there. But one of the ones that's sticking out for me a lot is, and I love the way that you say it, is that recovering box checker. of, in my personal journey, similar, I think, of the story I told myself was, I'll be happy when I do this. I'll be happy when I achieve this. And it was this really weird feeling of every single time I got to that point, I went, oh, this doesn't feel how I thought it was going to. So I went, oh, I must have set my bar too low. So then I'm going to go up here, and then I would achieve that. This still doesn't feel good. I need to achieve this. And it was always that empty feeling inside. And, for me, through a lot of therapy, through a lot of work and looking in at myself and self-discovery, what I realized was I was actually living my life for other people to gain their approval, to gain self-worth from them. And that's the reason why I was always setting those benchmarks of, I'll be happy when, I'll do enough when I've done this. For yourself, do you know where that came from, of like feeling like you needed to check those boxes, and needing that external validation? Or are you still kind of working through that?
Yeah, I think really it came from my childhood. And partly that's where one of the chapters, like I said, is about nature versus nurture. I think part of it's my personality type. I think the other part is how I was raised. My dad is very dedicated individual. He's very committed to doing things thoroughly. Um, Worked very hard for 40 some odd years at the same company, like hardly missed any days of work, that type of person. And he always had like a right way and a wrong way to do something, right? Like if you're going to build something, there's a right way and there's a wrong way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, a judgment on anybody else. It was just that was his mindset. And it's a false dichotomy, right? There may be a better way, but there's other ways to do things. And so I think that got ingrained in me really young. And so I really kind of subscribed to that false dichotomy in a lot of things in my life. The flip side of that, and I point out in my book, is my dad's taught me dedication and, really overcoming adversity and taking on challenges in stride, no matter how hard it is. My mom is a very giving person, very, very sympathetic and empathetic with people. But I think she does it to the detriment of herself and doesn't always set boundaries that she needs to as a result. So for me, I won't say I wear my heart on my sleeve. I can definitely poker face. I think that's part of the lawyer, but I get really invested in people and wanting to help them. And that's really good, but also knowing where to draw the line and say that this is not, it's not being reciprocated, or this person doesn't value what I'm trying to do, or whether it's a job or anything else. So positive and negatives. And it's nothing about my parents. It's not a judgment call against them. That's just who they are. And then by who they are, they raised me. And I was raised in a very loving home. They were always supportive. I had a lot of things that most people didn't, being an only child. And as a result of that, I think that just all kind of grew into who I am as an individual. So I had external validation that I was getting. I also pushed myself internally. So most of what I did, because I got the external validation, aligned with what I wanted. So it wasn't so much I was living my life for other people. I was living my life for myself, I thought, but I was doing it to the point that was unrealistic. Still thinking I should be perfect when perfect doesn't exist for anybody or anything. And that's led me to come to finally that point, like you, I was checking off these boxes and why is this not fulfilling? Where I had that existential crisis where I was like, who am I and why am I doing this and what's my purpose in life? I think I managed to overcome that through therapy, but then that was just before this whole other event happened. And it just really threw everything out the window at that point. Because you can never prepare for something like that. It doesn't matter how much therapy you go through or how much you work on yourself. When something that crazy it comes in your life and occurs, there's just no preparing for it.
For sure. And, perfection was one that I have struggled with and still struggle with. And for me, the breakthrough moment in that was realizing every single person on this earth has a different definition of perfection. And so you could, if even you could achieve being perfect in somebody's eyes, the person right next to them would go, well, no, they're not perfect. Perfection is this. And so it was a moving target that you could never hit, even for, let alone one person, but for everybody. And coming off as that quote unquote perfect was just impossible. And as you were talking too, it's such an important thing of those boundaries. And, hearing you say, once you had hit that rock bottom, once you'd gotten to that point, you needed to draw those lines in the sand of, what I'm willing to do and not willing to do, what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do. And do you think it was because you had gotten to that point and it was just, there's no other option, that I need to start setting these boundaries, otherwise I can't continue? Or, just any sort of context, because boundaries are such a tough thing for people to start setting, and especially in healthy ways. Were there any other, factors or strategies that helped you in setting those boundaries, either getting over the mental blocks or just physically setting them?
Yeah. First of all, I want to jump back to what you're saying about perfection. It's interesting that you come at that angle. And for me, I finally discovered, and I wrote a little bit about in the book, the idea that perfection doesn't exist. I feel like, I think Stephen Hawking wrote a quote about that. And I put it in the book, but it literally is impossible, right? Because of its, non-existence. So it's just interesting how we attack it from both sides, but come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries, I've always been pretty good about that personally in my life.
Okay.
I think that's the only child thing. I had to entertain myself, and I hung out with girls that were a couple of years older than me, and girls as kids. I mean, it's horrible. So I learned early on to this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. I was very much an A-type child and adult, and a leader, not a follower. So I think that helped. But professionally, it was very difficult for me until that point where I hit rock bottom. And professionally, drawing those lines did come about out of necessity. I think it wasn't even a conscious choice that I was going to make these decisions, right? I think my soul, whatever that means to anybody, really decided overnight, you are not going to survive in any capacity if you don't change. And it forced me to change. And even nowadays, and even soon after that happened, I couldn't go back to those places mentally of giving myself to, the point of exhaustion, whether it be for work or for other people. And thank God my brain and body wouldn't let me do it, because so many people easily go back to that. Even when it's not good for you. And I did it for so many years, but I think out of necessity, it happened. But it's really easy to do when you start looking at the alternatives. And I think that's a good point of reference is, if I don't do this, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to lose my identity. I'm not going to be happy. And when I say that, I think that's our point and purpose in life. I genuinely believe that if you aren't going to be happy now, like you said, oh, I'll be happy when, if you do that the entire life, you're going to be on your deathbed going, well, this isn't what I expected.
Yeah.
And by then it's too late. So what do you have to lose by setting boundaries now? If you don't enjoy being around somebody, don't spend time with them. I don't care if they're your family. That's just where I am. And that's coming from an only child. I don't know if that's, makes sense or not for people on that. But I mean, I have to talk to my husband about that. He's very much he loves being around people, and he's very much a people person. But sometimes they're like, well, it's family. I was like, I don't care. It doesn't mean they're not shitty people.
Yeah.
And even if we have blood in common. So, but even professionally too, the worst thing that happens is you get to the end of your life and realize that you didn't live a fulfilling one. And to me, that's a hell of a lot scarier than burning any bridges with somebody in your life.
For sure. And I think that's a very, very tough one for people. And I'm so glad that you brought it up of, using the excuse, but their family. And just because somebody is family, just because, you've been friends with somebody since you were 3 years old, just because whatever the relationship might be, doesn't necessarily mean it isn't a bad relationship.
Right.
And I think for myself, for sure, that was very hard to accept. And it was, almost ingrained to me. It's like, no, this is your family. You kind of have to let them do whatever they want. You have to show up whenever they need you. You have to, whatever it might be, their family. So that automatically makes it okay. I think one of the biggest unlocks for myself that helped me work through that and setting those boundaries around family is realizing it doesn't have to be an all or nothing game either.
Yeah.
Of, yes, it might be your mom that you need some space from. And that doesn't mean you need to cut her out of your life completely. But maybe that means, you talk to her once a week instead of every day. Maybe that's, you see her once a month instead of every week. so that you can still maintain that relationship. And, you know, a lot of times you don't want to fully get rid of that relationship, even if you know that it's not the best for you. But you can limit the amount of time, you know, you can mentally prepare yourself going into it. You can still set boundaries within those relationships without completely walking away from them. And sometimes you do need to completely walk away from them, and that's okay too. So I'm just really glad that you brought up that point.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly true. Again, falling into that false dichotomy, it's all or nothing. And I think it's funny that we do this because I've done it for so long too. But we know the world's gray. I think most people know the world's gray, right? But we do. We want it to be all or nothing because I think it's logically easier for us to process. And
Yes.
even with my business, I thought either I'm going to practice law or I'm not. When I started having this epiphany about wanting to push forward in my personal brand, it's like, no, that's not how it has to be. I can practice as little or as much as law, as I can or want to. But yeah, in terms of relationships, I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot of people, and myself included with some of them. I am in those relationships because they're family, right? If they were individuals that were not family, I definitely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing or put in the work that I have. But it still, like you said, doesn't mean that you have to be all in all the time. And it doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries that are healthy. Um, as an example, I have a family member that does the same thing over and over and over again and is in denial about the fact that it's her doing it to herself. And my mom has been brought in, one of my aunts has been brought into it, and I most recently got brought into it to kind of help. And once I really realized that's what was happening, and I did it for my mom and my aunt because they had really pulled their weight with this. So I went and helped, and I haven't told her point blank, but that's what it is. I'm not going to be helping her anymore because she's doing this to herself. If she was the first one to say, like, I don't know where to start, I'm overwhelmed, please help, I'll be there in a heartbeat. And I'd do it for anybody that wasn't family. That's just who I am in that regard. But the fact that you're doing this to yourself and you know exactly what's causing it, I don't have any sympathy for you. I just don't. And I don't make light of trying how hard it is to get out of situations like that. Am extremely empathetic, especially to like depression and anxiety and things like that. But after some point, you have to at least you have to at least want to help yourself. That's the biggest thing. I can't do it for you and nobody else can. So setting boundaries in those relationships, because you know they're just not going to be healthy for you at the long run, is completely fine. And I don't know if part of this is the fact that I am an only child, so I had a smaller family. Although you would think I'd be even more like die hard about holding on to him
Yeah,
because of that. But then my husband and I decided not to have kids. And so I think that shifts my perspective on relationships and legacy, whatever that means for different people, and my existence long term. So I think I just am able to let go of certain things like that a little bit better, or more easily than some people might.
for sure. And I love what you said there. And, you know, 2 points for me that stood out were, you know, even in setting those boundaries, a lot of times, even if you've accepted that it's gray, it doesn't have to be black or white. I think the other piece too is that acknowledging that they're going to change, and what you thought stepping into it might not be what it needs, what that situation needs, what that person needs, what you need. And you know, even that example of you stepping into that, you know, stepping in with that family member of I'm stepping in, I'm going to show up. And then once you got more information, you need to adjust how you're showing up. And the second part was just is so tough, especially for people that are givers, emotional givers, and want to support others in, you know, matters of mental health, in, you know, quote unquote doing the work of self-improvement. You can get so far with people. At the end of the day, they're the ones that need to truly make the decision that they want to work on themselves, that they want to get better, that they truly want to make progress. Because if they don't, you can't force them no matter how hard you try. And that was also a huge one that took a lot for me to finally accept, because similar to what you said earlier, I'm not one to give up. I will, you know, try, and if it kills me, I will keep trying. And so taking that step back, realizing that I could literally try every single day, every single minute of my entire life. And if they're not willing, there's nothing that I can do. I can push them so far, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a tough one. I mean, I see people, say, well, like, what if this next time something happens and I'm not there? You can what if yourself to death. And again, like, if it's hard, I know it's hard to let it go, but you think about the alternative and it's you giving of your entire self to where you don't have anything left even for you. And that's still, I just, it's a self-preservation thing maybe, but I think you have to put your oxygen mask on to yourself first before you help other people. And we forget that a lot at the end of the day, especially like you said, with people who are givers.
Yeah,
And I love, because I'm fascinated by psychology and everything that goes into it. So like, it's still, it's a mental gymnastics for me too. But yeah, it's really hard to walk away from something like that, especially when you know what it feels like to be in that position and to be in a dark place and feel like, you know, you're never going to get out. But I think there's a healthy way of doing it, right? I think you can tell a person whether they hear you or not in a positive way, you know, of course, using the I statements instead of you, but also saying, I feel this way when I'm around you. I don't want to feel this way. I want to have a relationship with you. I need to set boundaries for myself and make it about you in that regard. And they may hear you, they may not, they may throw it back at you, but you've done what you can. And you've also let the other person know. So it's not like you're hiding the ball. It's not like they don't know why, even if they don't agree with it or appreciate it. You've laid it all out on the table and have been authentic to not only yourself, but to them as well.
for sure. And it's interesting because I had a similar conversation with a friend recently about they were struggling in one of their relationships, a friend who is struggling with addiction, and trying to figure out how do they still support them while drawing the boundaries. And a lot of times it feels like you're abandoning that person, that they're in a time of need, and so I can't set these boundaries because that's me abandoning them. And really, you know realizing that if it is a true boundary, if it's a healthy boundary, it's not you abandoning them, it's you letting them know that you are there to support them, and these are the ways that you can support them, and these are the ways that you can't. Almost like the rules of engagement. But it's not that you don't want to help them, it's not that you are abandoning them, this is the way that I can and need to help you, and it needs to be up to you whether or not you can take that help.
Yeah, that's so incredibly true. And especially I think about the one family member. And I need to sit down and have this conversation with her, do as I say, not as I do. It's just hard, especially when you're dealing with somebody in an addiction state. It's like there never is a good time to have that conversation, right? Even when they're not on a high, it's still, they're very volatile people. It's not a good conversation. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you can still be supportive of somebody and say, hey, you know, if you want to get help, I'll be the first one to go with you. If you want to, you know, start on something new, I'll be there with you. But if you're going to keep doing X, Y, and Z, I can't be a part of that.
Yeah.
And again, it's really tough. I don't make light of it, but the alternative is you living a life that is being dictated by somebody else and not in a good way. So I think at the end of the day, you really have to decide who's worth more. And I know it sounds brutal, but I really think that's what you have to boil it down to.
Yeah, and the oxygen mask metaphor really speaks to me in that. And shifting a little bit back to your experience with the partner of the firm committing suicide, it's a topic that's really important to me and close to my heart. As my first experience with it was joining a men's group about a year and a half ago now, and seeing these men that I saw as like strong and capable and great people and happy, and you know hearing them open up about suicidal thoughts, them actually planning out their own suicides, them attempting their own suicides, and something going wrong or someone coming home at the wrong time. And it really hit me of just how real of a thing it is. And for me, I think a lot of it stems from shame, the shame of talking about it, the shame of, I'm having these thoughts, or, I feel like I can't do it anymore. The shame of I'm not good enough, of whatever it might be. It comes from so many different places. But the thing for me that really stood out was, one, it's why I, originally started this podcast, was if I could help even one of those people feel like they're not alone. Because feelings of aloneness were, with so many of those men, and showing people that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones that go through this, that, sure, maybe not everybody has those thoughts, but it is a lot more common than people think. And there's nothing quote unquote wrong with that. It's addressing it. It's, not falling into that shame spiral of, oh, I have these thoughts, which makes me go into a lower spot, which makes me have more of these thoughts. And bringing them to light has been a big one of, for myself, talking about my insecurities, talking about the things that I struggle with, putting them out there to the world instead of keeping them into the dark. And I think of it almost as, festering in that darkness. And that's why for me, the overarching feeling that I get and that I like to address is almost shame and the fact that you don't know what's going on in other people's lives truly. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I totally agree with you. I love Brene Brown. I think we touched on maybe she does this shame research, and it's just fascinating to me. But it's so incredibly true. And I can't. I think just anecdotally that men do have a more difficult time, societally speaking, embracing what is really going on inside their heads and addressing it because they're supposed to be seen as manly men, and manly men don't have these issues, right? But like you said, the reality is, I'm willing to bet everybody's had them. Whether they're aware of them or not is something totally different. And I think, people listening need to understand there's a difference between totally perfect in your mind mentally and committing suicide, right? There is a huge spectrum in between. And the suicidal ideations are a huge part of that. And a lot of people have them. And again, like you said, it's not good, but it's normal in the sense that it's so common. It's how we address them. And I really delved into this in the beginning of my book too, about like threats to us as people. Like, what do we perceive as threats in this world today? Well, it's, belonging to a group or being outcast for a group or standing out in a negative way. Whereas like back, millions of years ago, it was just surviving and being chased by a tiger, right? So now it's almost like our brain is creating threats in a way that are hard to even face because they're so existential in nature, right? So I think it makes it even harder these days in that regard, but we still perceive them as threats. And at a very base level, our minds go to dark places because it's such a threat to our identity and who we are as an individual. And I think that's why we go to such drastic places when we feel ashamed or we feel cast out and we think, I don't even want to be here because of that. But like you said, really embracing, okay, why getting to the root of the why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like I need to live up to these expectations? Or why do I feel like I'm a failure if I don't do X? And that's what I mean when I talk about the status quo and the addiction to the status quo, because the status quo in my mind are internal, external expectations that are put on us or we put on ourselves, and we feel the need to live up to at the expense of ourselves at the end of the day. And so I think that leads to so many problems like this shame and not being able to stand up and say what's really, affecting you. But I think it's so common and people think, oh, well, I'm only thinking about driving off the road on my way home from work. So I'm really not in a bad place. That doesn't mean I'm actually suicidal. Yes, it does. It's not a good thing. And it's something that you really need to embrace then. You don't want to embrace it when you're looking down the barrel of a shotgun. And it's okay. It's okay to get help before it's a significant problem. And I think that's where people fall out of line with it, because I think people think you need a formal diagnosis of anxiety, depression, fill in the blank before they go see a therapist. Hell no. I go there all the time. I mean, I go regularly, and it's just a great way to process things, because I think the reality is in this world, we don't want to dump on people most of the time, right? Either because we don't think they'll understand or we don't want to be a burden. So having somebody that's a third party who literally does this for a living that you can talk to and reason through things, that is in your corner. And that's the biggest thing, always finding somebody that you feel comfortable with that genuinely is in your corner. But that's huge. And if you have to pay for it, so be it. I mean, that's totally fine. But it means, again, that you're living a better quality of life. The only one you're punishing at that point is yourself by not getting help. And again, I understand it's hard to start reaching out when you never have before, but the alternative is so much worse.
for sure. Yeah. And I think that's huge for me. Finding those people that you can talk in those relationships that really you can be your full self, your authentic self, and that you can go to those places. And, for me, it also started with a therapist. I started seeing a therapist over a couple of years. I became more comfortable opening up to other people. I joined that men's group. I've fostered friendships where that is the type of relationship we have. We are there to go to those places.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with having, quote unquote, surface level relationships, or just ones where you have fun, or you don't go to those places necessarily. But it's so important having those people in your life where you can tell them that you're in a bad spot. You can tell them that you're struggling with something, whether that's a therapist, whether that's your romantic partner, whether that is, friendships, or just people that are part of your network, where you can go to them and go into those places, and they can bring those places to you as well. Is so important. And that idea that you were talking about of almost preventative versus reactionary, of you can work on this stuff before you hit that rock bottom. You don't need to hit that rock bottom. You don't need to have that formal diagnosis. You don't need for something to quote unquote go wrong, or a big event. You can start working on it right away. And I equated a lot of times to physical health,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of, getting a trainer, of, eating healthy and starting to work out before, you're extremely overweight and can't move. Like, that seems so logical to us. We're like, well, of
Yep.
course. But when it comes to mental health, when it comes to working on the other side of things, like, no, I'm fine right now. I don't need any help, or I don't need to address that. So I'm glad that you went there. Um, we are coming up on time here. And so I was just curious, did you have anything that you wanted to say, anything that you wanted to talk about before I let you go?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about my book a little bit.
For sure.
It is written on the backdrop of me being a lawyer and how I came to have my own practice, but I do think it benefits professionals of any level. Just know, one, like you said, they're not alone. Two, kind of understanding how, to overcome adversity and really take some meaningful steps towards starting to put their life on that path to happiness. And what I'm doing, like I said, with my speaking and coaching now, is really trying to work one-on-one with people to help take them from, I don't know, I'm lost, I'm so tired, to I'm living a life that's fulfilling. I know that's a tall order, but I genuinely believe, because I've been through it, I'm a professional as well, so I can appreciate a lot of the demands that are put on us. That's really what can help you get from point A to point B. And especially if you're not ready to talk to a therapist, I understand there's still a lot of, stigma attached to it, and it's a mental stumbling block, no pun intended, for a lot of people. So being able to talk to somebody that at least can relate, I think, is helpful to starting on the path towards recovery. But my book is sold on Amazon, Overcoming Addiction to the Status Quo. And then my website, Kathryn F, as in Frank, Burmeister.com, is where people can find what I'm doing, podcasts I've been on, and connect with me socially. Honestly, I'm on Instagram the most. So that's the best place to connect with me.
Awesome. I'll put notes in the show here so that people can find you. And I just wanted to say too, it was such an important thing, and one of the reasons why I was so interested, when you had first reached out, because I find that the professional world is one of those where it's lots of shoulds. This is what
Oh, yeah.
you should look like. This is how you should act. And I think it is one of those fields that you don't have a lot of space to explore your mental health. You don't have a lot of space to do things differently. And having somebody that comes from that world and can truly understand it from the inside and not just from the outside, I think is a huge asset. So,
And I think that's what's interesting. I'm not taking away from other coaches or other individuals, but I think it is a unique set that I do bring to the table, because that's why I've been trying to streamline my message. Like, how am I different, and how can I help people in a different way? And that really is it, the fact that I've lived through it and have had those exact same experiences. So I appreciate what that world is like. Even if it's not legal, we all know they overlap and have that energy around them, like you said. So yeah, I'd be happy for people to reach out to me. And honestly, the first person that reaches out to me after hearing this podcast and lets me know, I'll be happy to send them a copy of my book for free.
that's amazing. Thank you so much for being on here. I really enjoyed our conversation, and can't wait to see what the future holds for both of us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.